Welcome to the Nevcast, where three bros talk business, art, justice, and the pursuit of Jesus.
Any day above ground is a good day.
Get ready to laugh, cry, and kiss 30 minutes goodbye with Peter Nevland,
Dave Nevland,
and
Rashid.
Hey.
Oh.
Rashid.
How you doing?
Great, because Rashi is answering our phone call. He's going to talk to us again on this fine morning.
Someone told me that I have a really low voice the other day, that I have a voice that should be on radio. I'm what?
It's starting to sound like that. I think you've
What?
been... Rashi, I think Dave's been drinking a lot of whiskey.
I have not.
It has changed your voice.
Is that what whiskey does to a person's voice?
You have this deep
I haven't been
quality of voice that I can't even approximate because of your deep tenor voice that can also hit high notes. It's just, you're Bobby McFerrin-like.
Dude, I've got like a range, man.
Sing Don't Worry, Be Happy. Sing Don't Worry, Be Happy.
Don't worry, be happy.
Well,
be happy now.
We tried.
Woo. Oh, you want me to do that part? Woo.
There we go. Come on. All right.
Worry.
That was better.
Woo. Be happy.
Don't worry, be happy.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so you can
not
hear,
a little song I wrote.
there's a little talent, but there's also some need for some work.
Oh, gosh.
On my end.
Oh,
the
okay.
harmony wasn't perfect. I'm not saying that you were messed up.
No, because I don't need any work.
Now, Rashi, you know very well that Dave and I are some crazy brothers, right?
Yeah. Y'all are some crazy brothers.
In every sense of the word. But did you know that Dave, who's looking right across from me, is a studious researcher of history?
Well, I am, but I just like it. You do what you like, you know, what you can't help.
There may be some places on planet Earth where they call him Professor Dave.
Not yet.
No, he's not actually a professor, but he is. He knows as much, or probably more than a lot of professors do about this topic. Did you know that, Rashi?
I never knew that.
Well, you knew a little bit of it. We've talked about it sometimes.
Apparently you haven't impressed him enough so that he knew that.
I got to work on keeping impressing.
Yeah, you gotta impress.
That was a great sentence.
Sometimes we talk about how your value apart from what you can do, but in this case, you needed to do more.
But it's emotional for me. It's emotional for me. It is. I'm trying. I mean, I know I got to be emotional about it.
And
so
Dave,
it is.
Your feelings are not just valued. They are special.
Yeah.
You are special. You're
That's right.
God's special child.
Yes, I am.
You really are.
I'm a precious moment.
Your head is 5 times too big and shaped much like an egg.
That's the original. What do they call the Popco dolls right now that have the heads that are really big?
Oh,
and
yeah.
the little bodies.
Yeah. Right. You can get those. We got those at what's that? The place in New York City where they do the dancing. Tom Hanks dances on the piano in Big. Big. That toy store.
That toy store.
Anyway, it's not Gimbals. That's an elf. But this is.
I can see it's 2 names.
F.A.O. Schwartz. F.A.O.
That's
Schwartz.
not 2 names, is it?
F.A.O. Schwartz. Well, it's
kind of
the name. Anyway, so what I was going back to, Dave just referenced these dolls, and I was saying that those dolls.
I said precious moment. Yeah, that's
they're
original.
F.A.O. Schwartz. You can build them yourself now.
There we go. Off on the bunny. Back on the bunny trail.
So Rashid, Dave has done this amazing amount of research, and Dave, you're telling me about the untold story of basically the history of revival in America, because I think what we hear,
and I would say revival worship, because it does tend to be. We've had a lot of history of revival because people that speak on it go into doing the history of the speakers.
Yeah, the history
people
of the
who
speakers,
are known for what they say.
Yeah, right.
But few, it seems like, incorporate the history of what society, the art and the worship and the music that was happening with it.
Yeah, because almost every one of them starts with a song.
Oh, let's see, you can.
And the other thing about it is, especially in America, there are very few, I don't know if there are any, You tell me if there are any, but all I've heard is, when you read history books and stuff, you hear about the Great Awakening, right?
Preachers.
And then you hear about the Second Great Awakening that happened, and then you maybe could get into like an Azusa Street or maybe the Jesus movement, but all the people that are referenced in all those movements are all white people. George Whitefield, John Wesley. You've got I can't even remember the Azusa Street people, but they don't mention any of the people who started. And then
if you get to Azusa,
the Jesus movement, that was all Calvary Chapel out in California.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
And it's all white people, but apparently that's not the truth. That's not the full extent.
Well, no,
of what happened.
Right. It's not the full extent. I mean, it's definitely not, and. Because, I mean, shoot, we've had a kind of a segregated history in North America for quite a while.
Right.
And it's just that the one part that, especially during enslavement, was not really being documented by people so much.
By which
but,
people? Or anybody.
By historians, necessarily. Or anybody, that's right.
Yeah.
A lot of it was hard to document because it was happening in secret.
Right. Ah, right. Okay.
So that, but I'm definitely interested in how we got here, and how and I do see that the ones that aren't being documented had a huge part to play and were being molded and shaped by some of the same forces, some of the same movements, and that's incredible, and it's amazing, and it's not usually brought out.
Well, and this is the other thing, is like whether you're white or whether you're black, you probably haven't heard most of these stories in America.
It's kind of rare.
Like, I mean, just throw out some names. Let's throw out some names for us and ask Rashi and me if either one of us have heard these people.
Okay. I mean, William Seymour. You know who that was?
I think so. Rashi, do you know who that was?
No, I don't know who that was. Who was that?
William Seymour. Was he the guy in San Francisco? Was he the blind?
L.A.
Blind man?
He wasn't blind.
L.A.
He only had one good eye, though. William Seymour. That was Azusa Street.
Azusa Street.
Okay.
So I got close.
Yeah.
But I thought San Francisco. Like, I don't know.
Because at that same time, right at that, it was like a few months in that the big San Francisco quake happened. So anyway.
Oh, okay.
It affected what they thought. Phyllis Wheatley. You know Phyllis Wheatley.
Now I know Phyllis Wheatley, but that's only because I'm a writer.
If you say her name quick enough, it's Phyllis Wheatley.
Phyllis Wheatley. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Rashid, have you heard of Phyllis Wheatley?
I never heard of him. Who was he again?
She was the first. So we could say it like this: she was the first superstar poet in North America.
And she was black.
She was not white.
Formerly a slave.
Well, she was a slave. She was an enslaved person.
A person of color. Yeah.
While she was being made into a superstar poet.
Well, I remember reading about. I read about her in English.
Right.
In
private school.
No.
In
English at the University of Texas in my English course.
Oh, okay.
Because she's history, and there was this poem that we read, and it was she wrote, "Oh, blessed middle passage, because the horrors and the trials that I suffered brought me to meeting my dear Savior." And when we read this poem, everybody in my class, including the teacher, began to dismiss it and say, well, clearly she was influenced by her captors and by her slave masters, and they forced her to write that. And so
they thought that back then.
Yeah.
They were thinking that back then. Yeah.
But that apparently, if you actually delve into her life, that's not the case. And I just raised my hand and said, hey, I thought that we really tried to look at things from a balanced perspective here. Because everybody's saying this one viewpoint about how she must have been coerced to write all this. And I said, what if? Because she was set free. She was set free.
And she ended up being set free, right?
She's set free. And she wrote this after she was set free. And
that part. Okay, she wrote that part.
She wrote that part after she was set free. And I said, what if she actually had an authentic experience and something happened to her that was more amazing, so amazing that it made the trials of getting to it seem like they were worth it to get to this wonderful thing. I mean, just what if?
Yeah.
we have to at least consider it. And my teacher, she said, well, you're actually right. We do have to at least consider that possibility because we don't know.
20 years ago.
And it opened up a conversation, right? I mean, it's so easy to just think we know.
Was she saying we don't know? We don't know how she was feeling. I mean, so we could talk about her a little bit. She was 7 years old when she came to the port in South Carolina.
Yeah, because I don't know this stuff. Rashi, do you know this? Do you know this stuff? You didn't even know. You didn't know Phyllis Wheatley, right?
I don't know none. I don't know nothing about none of it. I don't want to sit here and lie to you. No,
that's okay. I tell you, man, I need to send you a book of her poetry because she's an incredible writer. Right. Like, she's not just like the first superstar poet in North America. Like, she is one of the best poets of all time in North America.
The ship captain thought she was going to die, and so, but he couldn't sell her in South Carolina because she was too young and too frail, and so so after they this is terrible, offloaded most of the other enslaved people in South Carolina in that Port Royal, right? Then he went up to the port of Boston, where he was able to bring the more the ones that weren't they wouldn't have sold because they couldn't work on the plantations in the Caribbean. Right. So she was frail, 7 years old, and he thought she was going to die. So he wanted to get some money out of her before she died, and he was wrong about her. Sure. And so she went into the service of a family, and she was the only person that they had. But they realized, well, one, that she wasn't going to die, and then two, that she's quite precocious. So her owners started, and the owner's kids started educating her. Educating her the same way that they would educate their own kids in classic literature and writing. And then she's like 11 years old, and she starts writing poetry, and they're like, whoa. And her 13-year-old, she got one published when she was 11 years old, and then 13 years old, she got another one published. But she broke into fame by writing a eulogy for George Whitefield, the revivalist preacher. Right. Now, so here's where the streams start coming together. Right. So she wrote this eulogy for George Whitefield. Now but it wasn't accepted in the colonies, and so to be published.
It wasn't accepted,
right?
Because
she was an enslaved person.
Okay, and because she was black.
Right, that's right.
Right, okay.
Yeah. I mean, there weren't enslaved white people, but...
Well, there have been
many. Yes.
But I'm not saying... Okay. But in the colonies,
so they sent it to England to get a publisher to see if any of the England... Because he was big in England, and then it gets read at his memorial service in London. And now boom, she is, and then she gets invited to all these things. She gets invited over to London, where she's like hanging out with all these people. So and especially the abolitionist movement, right, in London and in England really embraced her. And these are big muckety mucks, right? So this two-part thing going on in England too.
And just refresh the time period.
This is 1760s.
1760s. So this is before the American Revolution.
Right, that's right.
And it's before England actually passed a law abolishing slavery. That didn't happen.
Yeah. I thought that was earlier.
In the late 1700s.
Okay, you're right.
Maybe even early 1800s.
That's right.
With William Wilberforce and
that's right.
Everything
early
like that.
1800s.
That was Amazing Grace came out of that.
They didn't, because their idiot understanding was that this can't possibly happen, and so even back then they were like, "You're forcing her to write this. This isn't her."
Someone. But
she's 19 years old when this starts happening. So there's always
been a narrative. It's interesting. There was a narrative when she was alive that this possibly can't be her writing this, because the narrative then was she couldn't be smart enough to do that. Now the narrative is she couldn't have the willpower, but it's the same. It sounds like the same evil lie is being perpetuated over and over and over to justify either one terrible dismissive attitude or another dismissive attitude for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
I think it's important.
Yeah, no, really, and well, and you know, she espouses some of this. Some of her, she writes to Christians of the world. I'm gonna botch this. I could look it up and read it, but she says that Negroes black as Cain. So
Yes.
this is an. So she
I remember
knows
this
the
poem.
idea that we think, or that it's proposed that Cain was black and he was not his offering was not accepted by God, so his line was cursed.
Yeah, that was
was
part of the lie.
Part of the lie that this whole race was cursed because they're part of Cain, and da 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 da. Well, she says, Negroes black as Cain have right on the gospel train.
Yes,
Got
that's
on
right.
the salvation, right on the salvation
gotta read
train.
that poem.
That's a good one. That is good. Yeah, we should pull that.
I'm going to look it up, and we're going to read it, but continue.
Right. Okay. So, anyways, so yeah, so she gets brought to fame and starts hanging out. But when she goes back, you know, she's still doing her chores and stuff around to help the house out, right? But eventually, the matriarch dies, and I believe that's when she gets released from being enslaved, and then that's a tenuous situation because there's not many people released from slavery at that time, and that kind of, you know, existence to try to find your way was tough as a freed black American, African American. Right? Anyway, you want to read that?
Yeah. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain may be refined and join the angelic train.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. That's it. That's that one. Yeah.
That's just a little short one, but ooh, bang.
I mean, yeah, but not.
And it
hate.
still was not hateful.
Right.
Right.
I mean, that's that. Now that is what the Holy Spirit does in people's lives.
Yeah.
Right. Truth with love. Truth with redemption.
Right.
Yeah. So that okay. So that's Phyllis Wheatley.
Rashid, what do you think hearing that poem? What did you feel when you heard that?
No. It sounds good, man. I'm not really in I don't do a lot of research on history, man. Like, I don't do a lot of research. I just read relevant books, man. Like,
Right.
books is relevant. I don't think it's not. I mean, the great what's his name? Hitler said, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. So
I don't think that was Hitler.
There's a lot of people that have said that. That's
but
interesting. I didn't know some.
No, he did say that. He said that. Matter of fact, I was seeing that on a documentary the other night. He was speaking in German and they was translating.
Wow.
When he said that, like,
what if he was the first?
If you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Oh, interesting. Well, he was doomed to repeat history.
So even yeah.
So I mean, like, I study history like on stuff like, you know, like, I think things have changed in America, man. Like, I think racism is still prevalent.
Sure.
But it's not like it used to be.
Right.
It's more opportunities, but, you know, so I study stuff like that, man, like for its history.
Yeah.
But
I just wondered if that poem had when you heard that, anything stirred in your mind, hearing that, you know, the poem about, you know, some view our sable race with scornful eye, say, you know.
I mean, she's identifying.
You talking about the poem you did?
The poem I just read.
Yeah. Okay.
Said their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain, can be refined and join the angelic train.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, she's speaking right to the lie.
She's speaking.
When you say the angelic train, what do you mean by that?
When she's saying the angelic train, she's using metaphor to talk about, man, be part of, to be in God's kingdom, to join heaven, but
that's the procession. It's not their trains didn't exist at right?
No, this is the procession. The angelic train is the procession of
into
the people straight into God's presence.
When the saints go marching in.
It's that same idea.
Yes.
Yeah. And who knows, when the saints go marching in may have been inspired by this poem.
Maybe.
So that's speaking in metaphors. That's metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, that's right. It's metaphorically speaking of the procession straight into God's presence, where she's saying, remember that people that look like me are just as valid and just as accepted in God's presence as people that don't look like me.
Yes. Because she was speaking from experience.
And I mean, that's deep, man. She broke it down.
Right?
Yeah, I ain't got lost for a minute. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's all right. That's all right. It happens sometimes when we're talking.
Right.
But yeah, it is deep. Right?
Well, so here's another name, Isaac Watts. You know Isaac Watts?
I've heard of Isaac Watts. I heard the phrase in the Revolutionary War, they would say, give them Watts, boys. There was a preacher who did that, which is a pretty cool story.
Well, what were they? Rashi, have you heard of Isaac Watts or Old Dr. Watts?
Old Dr. Watts? No, I never heard of him. What was he do? Who was he? What did he do?
Right. So he was a songwriter. So the reason in the Revolutionary War that they said stuff Watts in them or something.
Give them Watts, boys.
Give them Watts is because what they were doing, they were running out of paper to wrap their buckshot in to load their guns to shoot at the British. Right, as these colonists, ramshackle colonists that end up defeating the biggest empire on the planet at the time.
Yes.
Crazy. Okay, but they're running out of paper, and so they'd go into the churches and they'd rip the hymn and they'd use the paper that is in the hymn books, and most of the hymns in the 1770s had been written by a lot of them. Predominantly Isaac Watts. He had changed worship.
It was a specific battle where the revolutionary forces were pushed back and they took refuge in a church, and they were fighting out of a church, and this pastor was on the side of the revolutionaries. And so they said, well, we've run out of paper, and the paper they had in the hymnals was thin. And so the pastor grabbed the books, started ripping out the pages, and then he gives them the paper from the hymn books and says, give them Watts, boys, give them Watts.
Okay,
so that's exactly where it came from.
The reason I bring him up is because in the Black Church and Black Gospel, Dr. Watts is referred to as this guy that they go back to and say, his music, I mean his songs, his worship songs are something that we really looked back to as like they first really gravitated to what he wrote. Now the whole
He's
world
the first
did.
Crossover artist.
Exactly.
From white to black.
That's right. Because what had happened before Isaac Watts, the 100 years before Isaac Watts, we're going back to the Reformation. So in the Reformation, there's such a reaction and such a turnover against what was thought to be all the corruption in the Catholic Church. Well, so you had these movements of what now in the Reformation, what should worship be? What should it look like? It dang sure shouldn't look like what's in the Catholic Church, is what they were thinking, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so you had these three guys. You had Martin Luther, who wrote music.
He was writing music,
songs, and he rewrote doctrine in the vernacular into worship songs. And that was first. That was different.
He was a talented writer. Of course he's going to end up writing songs.
Right? And he didn't write a ton of them. Like he said, he wrote like 36 or something.
Yeah.
Well, then you have... so that's in German. That's the most well-known one.
God.
Yes.
Dun, dun,
a bulwark never failing.
A bulwark never failing. I don't know what it is in German.
Is he amidst the flood of mortal ills prevailing. So it gets translated in English. He wrote it in German.
Dun, 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 dun,
For
dun.
still our ancient foe doth seek to work us woe. His path and power are great, and armed with cruel hate. On earth is not his equal. That's the first stanza.
On earth is not his equal.
I mean, he's singing about, you're singing about Satan at this point, right?
Right.
And then you go through the next 6 or 7 stanzas, and then you come to the victor at the end,
Right.
which is Christ, and how he's victorious and everything. So I mean, that's the most.
So they
well-known
start
one.
writing these songs.
So that's in Germany, but now here's the thing: in Switzerland, you have 2 other guys, John Calvin
and Zwingli.
and Ulrich Zwingli.
Ulrich Zwingli.
Now, John Calvin wrote one hymn, is known as writing one hymn, but he didn't just do that. What he did is he rewrote a bunch of the Psalms in the people's vernacular, because he felt like the proper thing to do, not all this crazy Catholic stuff that's going all this way and that way, that we need to sing the Psalms.
Right.
That's
You
what we
say
need
his
to do.
name was John what?
John
Calvin.
Calvin. That's John Calvin.
And you've heard there is a theological position called Calvinism,
Yeah.
which people tend to associate it with meaning that you are either predestined for salvation or predestined for not salvation. But John Calvin did a whole lot more than just talk about predestination.
Yeah. So, but John Calvin, what he ended up doing is he composed this thing called the Geneva Psalter.
Okay.
So the Geneva Psalter is basically the hymn book that lines out these psalms that he translated, all of them, into the I think there was maybe not all of them, into the vernacular, so people would sing them in worship, right?
Well, and the big departure was the Catholic Church was singing all these would not translate the Bible out of Latin.
Right.
You had to
didn't know
speak
what you're
Latin
singing.
in order to sing
Yeah.
anything that was in their songbook.
Right.
And so the Mass was all in Latin, and also, I mean, and that continued up until the mid 20th century.
Yeah.
Up until like the 1950s, everything was in Latin.
Until
And
Vatican II. Yeah.
And so it was heretical to the Catholic Church for all these people to start printing the Bible in their own languages. And all these people said, hey, not only are we going to print the Bible, but people need to sing and they need to worship and be able to express their hearts and their souls to God in their own language.
And not until England broke away from and joined the Reformation and said, "Oh, the King of England is now the Archbishop of the Church of England," well, I just for nefarious reasons. But then they could King James, got 70 scholars together and translated it into the English.
And I think it's ironic. I think it's very ironic that white culture was enslaved to the Catholic Church.
Ironic.
And then broke free into the Protestant Reformation.
That's
in breaking free, they took the attitudes of their captors, of their slave masters, who were the Catholic Church, and then enslaved other people.
Right. And here's the one that did it
That's
maybe
sad.
the most, that
That's
possibly
awful.
did it the most. The guy that was the best musician, that was most versed in instruments, was this guy Ulrich Zwingli.
Yeah.
And he said we shouldn't have any singing in the church, not even of psalms, because he said you just can't get away from the sensuality of music. Okay. And so,
Sad.
and in parts of Switzerland where he was, for the next 100 years, in his church, in churches that came behind him, they didn't have any music.
That was the same thing that the Pharisees came out of.
Oh,
actually,
is it? Yeah.
It was the because
No,
what
it happened. That's right, in the
it happened
synagogue
in the captivity in
under
Babylon.
the Hellenist.
What had happened in Israel was that the worship had grown into this pagan thing. And so then they were getting all sensual, and there were like ritual harlots that got involved in worship ceremonies. They started bringing all this perversion in, and so in the captivity they said, well, that was all that idolatry and all that worship was what got us off. So we are going to establish this meeting house, and all we will do will focus on the Bible and the Word.
Yeah.
And so all they had was the Scriptures, and they would recite the Scriptures, they would debate them, they would talk about them, and the Pharisees were birthed out of that. They were the ones who had purified the doctrine, and guess what? They missed Jesus, and what do you think happened then again in the Western Church, where all these guys that said, well, worship is too sensual, and they got doctrine, but they didn't get mercy and they didn't get the love of God.
Yeah, and the pilgrims that came to North America, they brought a version of the Genevan Psalter called the Ainsworth Psalter. It translated into English as opposed to German, which is the Genevan Psalter, right? So that's what they brought to the New World, and who was settling the New World was the Puritans,
right?
Because the Puritans were breaking off from the Church of England because they were trying to purify what they thought the Church of England had been going too far with. So and they were saying this is the right worship.
And the people that Phyllis Wheatley lived with were Puritans.
They were Puritans, but that's seven. You know, she
that was
lived
later.
1760s. Yes,
yeah.
right. So
140 years after
Isaac
the
Watts. Isaac Watts in the late 1690s. He's a 22-year-old kid, and he had been a precocious child too, and he had started writing songs when he was a little kid. Well, now when he gets 22, he's still doing this, and he has this flood, and he loves Jesus. I mean, he has this soft place for Jesus, but he's very intelligent too. And his dad.
Wait, you can love Jesus and be intelligent?
Yeah, you can.
Oh,
and then, and you know, he was like, I don't like the worship, Dad, in the churches. And then his dad was like, well, you write your own then, you know. And
he's like,
and so
I will.
And so he did. Right. And so his words and his songs were personal. They were personal, you know, of what he felt, and they were lyrical, and you couldn't always say. A lot of times he tried, and they did, to say, "Oh, this is from that scripture, and this is," but they're a paraphrase.
Right.
What? You can it's okay to paraphrase. And what happened with his songs just spread like wildfire because the people were so thirsty to express themselves to God, and he was able to use it with he didn't actually write music.
Right.
He just was writing the words.
Right.
And they would end up being put to music. But these personal feelings and revelations, right? They brought him over to the New World, and it was then in enslaved populations. They really grabbed on to his personal words of personal expression.
Words of personal experience with Jesus,
yes.
Not just doctrine.
Exactly. Because we know that is the gift of that ethnicity is personal expression. That's one of the huge things that everyone knows.
Right.
That is, I mean, yeah. Anyways, is the blessing that they are to the rest of the world is personal expression.
Yeah. By and large, there's a whole lot more emotional freedom. And Rashid, tell us if we're speaking out of turn, but I would say in my experience, I've always experienced that when I've been in what you would call black culture or around people of color, however you want to say that I have felt that there is so much more emotional freedom in that culture than there is in white culture. Do you think that's a fair thing to say, Rashid?
Yeah, it's more, yeah. It is, man.
And if you want any proof, you just one Sunday you go to a white church and be in it. You just pick one. Any white church, and then the next Sunday you go to any black church. Just pick one, and you see which one feels more emotionally free. Right?
Yeah. But you know what? What's crazy about that?
What's that?
I felt more welcomed at white churches than I did black churches. And what I mean by that, I feel more welcome at white churches. Like that place I used to go called Hope in the City.
Right.
Like you felt like the people embraced you and showed you love. It was like
awesome.
A fashion show at a black church, and so I got turned down one time because I was dressed. I had been in the hood one night and was dressed up, and and I asked the preacher one time to go with my mama to go to church because I had did something bad in the streets, and the preacher turned me down and told me I couldn't come. Wow. But it's like when I went to like white churches like Hope in the City, they was like, man, come in dirty as you are. This and you dirty. This is where you're supposed to be at. So that's the difference right there between black and white churches.
We all have our gifts, right? And there are some good things and there are some bad things and everything, right?
Yeah.
So Anyway, so Isaac Watts. So
I'm going to continue this, but we're going to have to continue it onto a next episode.
All right,
because we've just barely gotten into the 1720s or whatever.
Yeah, right. Okay,
the 1730 rule. What you say?
Yeah, 1730s. This is way back there.
Isaac Watts is back in the early 1700s. You know, and so we're
talking.
talking.
But he broke something open.
So next Wednesday, we're going to hear more about Isaac Watts and the history of worship in revival in America. Professor Dave.
Yeah.
Next on the Nevcast. The Nevcast.
That's it for the Nevcast this time. Join us next week when we talk justice, business, and art in pursuit of Jesus. We will see you soon.